Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining, and welcome to the September installment of our EcoFlora virtual seminar series. My name is Lydia Paradiso, and I'm a doctoral student at the New York Botanical Garden and a graduate fellow with the New York City EcoFlora project. EcoFlora is a community science project with three main goals: to investigate urban ecosystems and urbanization, to support open source biodiversity data, and to increase the understanding and appreciation of plant life. To date, over 34,000 observers have made about 920,000 verifiable observations of about 11,000 species of plants and their biotic partners in New York City and posted them on iNaturalist. You can explore these observations in our project page, which I will post in the chat. If I can get my screen full size. All right. Each month, we also sponsor an EcoQuest challenge, which encourages New Yorkers to observe a particular species, group of plants, or interaction and post those onto iNaturalist. This month's challenge, Spot and Squash September, focuses on the recently infamous pest, the spotted lanternfly. Since it was first spotted in New York City in 2020, the spotted lanternfly has quickly multiplied and become a significant threat to many economically and culturally significant plants, such as grapevines, stone fruits, and maples. Adults will begin laying egg masses in September, which will then overwinter to hatch next spring. So you can help by documenting where these egg masses are located, whether they're on a plant or sometimes they can even be found on inanimate structures, but we are mostly interested in which plants. And once you document them, to also destroy them. We will post a link to a guide on recognizing and taking care of these egg masses as well. Oh, I'll post that in a second. If you want to receive emails about other events, upcoming events that we might have, I'll also post a link for our mailing list. And now I will turn it over to Tomi to introduce our speaker.
And Lydia, I posted the link, just so you know. Okay. Hi, everyone. So before I turn it over to our speaker tonight, I want to begin, per usual, with a land acknowledgement by recognizing the original people of this land, the Lenape, as well as their deep connection to the Lenape-Hoking homeland. As a representative of an organization dedicated to advocating for the more than human world, it is imperative to acknowledge the original stewards of this land, the Lenape, as well as the settler colonial genocide perpetrated against them and other indigenous communities. It is also important to recognize the resilience of the Lenape and all indigenous communities who still today continue to resist erasure. All right, so for our speaker tonight, our speaker is Rob Pirani, the program director of the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary program at the Hudson River Foundation. Hudson River HEP is a collaboration of government, scientists, and the civic sector that helps protect, restore, and provide access to the Hudson River estuary. It is one of 28 such programs around the country authorized under the Clean Water Act. Tonight, Mr. Pirani will discuss the conservation of the New York, New Jersey Harbor estuary, which is the largest public resource in the nation's greatest city. Mr. Pirani will talk about how conservation and management of its flora can help make its waters fishable and swimmable, and help ensure that the estuary's many benefits are available to people throughout the region. Please feel free to enter any questions or comments into the chat as we go. At the conclusion of the talk, we will go through as many questions as we are able. If you have a question or comment that you would like to verbally ask at the end of the talk, you can use the raise hand feature or note in the chat, and you will have the opportunity to do so. If you are unable to stay for the whole talk or would like to share this talk with others, a recording will be posted to the New York Botanic Gardens YouTube page or YouTube channel in the EcoFlora playlist. And that link will be linked in the chat now. And with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Rob Pirani.
Great. Well, thanks, Tomi, and thanks, Lydia. And thanks to all of you who have joined us this evening. Really excited to be here with you to talk about sort of the harbor estuary, a place I dearly love, and in particular, how plants are making it better. And obviously, I think we all understand the connections between plants and water and the larger ecosystem. But what I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about sort of our program and how it works, because it's kind of a unique collaboration, and then sort of spotlight three different ways in which kind of plants play a role in us meeting, in enabling us to meet our mission of enabling people and wildlife to benefit from fishable and swimmable waters. I'm going to talk really fast. I'm going to try to get through all my slides in like 45 minutes and hopefully leave time for Q&A at the end. But, you know, as Toby mentioned, please drop questions in the chat. And if I'm able to kind of multifunction, I'll answer them as I go, or we'll save them to the end. And I'll also refer to some documents. And sort of in the interest of keeping the slides up, I'll post those links in the chat at the end. So with that, let me just start, and just a quick orientation as to where we are. Of course, here, we are concerned with the program with the Hudson River, the Hudson Raritan Estuary, basically from the Troy Dam just north of Albany all the way down to where the waters of all those waterways enter New York Bight and the Atlantic Ocean. So it's an area with over 1,600 miles of shoreline, 250 square miles of open water. And our focus is really in the area highlighted. So that's the greater watershed that you can see. But we focus the work of the Harbor Estuary on that sort of the area kind of south of the Tappan Zee or the now Mario Cuomo Bridge down to the ocean. And it's kind of characterized by being, this is the kind of saltier and more urban portion of the larger watershed and estuary. And of course, you can see where the beautiful Botanic Garden is, relative to the rest of that estuary. So, the estuary is, a place, it's a place of a lot of wonder. It's a place that we feel is fully alive with all kinds of creatures, whether it's, the kind of glass eels that make their way here from the Sargasso Sea, to the oysters that are resident. This is actually Big, which is an oyster that was collected off of Pier 40 in Hudson River Park. And of course, we have many visitors, just like we've got, millions of tourists. We also have seasonal visitors to these waters, whether it's the humpback whales that are, visit us in the spring and fall right outside the, in the spring and summer, right outside of New York Bight, and occasionally kind of make their way into the harbor itself. As well as the birds that are, as folks know, New York City and Jamaica Bay in particular is, a hugely important stopover on the North Atlantic Flyway. And so, millions and millions of birds that visit us regularly. But of course, and as, Toby mentioned, we're part of a national estuary program. So I have a similar job to 27 sister organizations around the country. But what's, most important about our estuary is people, right? We share, these waters are shared by over 14 million residents. And, that makes the ecosystem here both, sort of ensuring that it stays healthy, a challenge, but it also brings great opportunities for providing places for people to access nature close to where they live. And, obviously that's why I'm a big fan of the EcoFlora project and the work it does to think about the plants and ecosystems of the region. Because of course this is why we call this place home, or I assume many of us here call it home. And that those resources form places to visit, for recreational purposes and for wonder, but also a place for kind of scientific exploration, whether it's, people getting their PhD like Lydia, or, just families seeking to kind of learn more about the environment where their homes are. So the way we sort of think about the estuary and the way we sort of try to improve its management is through a collaboration. The National Estuary Program and HEP in particular brings together partners from all the different kind of stakeholders who collectively are responsible for the health of the ecosystem. That ranges from federal agencies to local government, the wastewater utilities that manage water, sort of manage water flows into the estuary, as well as the many community organizations and non-governmental organizations that are stewards of the resource. Another key stakeholder are those academic scientists and educational institutions that help uncover the scientific information about the estuary and then bring that data and that understanding to managers. And so our role as the Harbor and Estuary Program is really to bring that collaboration together sort of in a virtuous cycle of understanding. We convene that partnership of stakeholders both through a policy committee at the highest level, to technical work groups and a citizens advisory committee, along with a science and technical advisory committee, and many other sort of meetings, large and small. Together, we sort of identify and then seek through science and data to address those management challenges and opportunities. Right now, we sort of package those priorities in an action agenda, and that's available on our website. And I'll drop the direct link in a minute, but it's hudsonriver.org. If you're interested in looking at all these documents, either hudsonriver.org for the Hudson River Foundation or the harborestuary.org for the Harbor and Estuary Program documents. Thanks, Tommy. So that action agenda is sort of organized around 5 goals: water quality, habitat, supporting the environmentally friendly maritime industry, a cornerstone industry that uses the estuary, improving public access to our waterways, and community engagement. So we've identified with our partners 40 priority actions. And again, what I want to do is focus in on some of those where, in particular, sort of managing the flora of the estuary and its watersheds really are enabling us to meet our goals and these important objectives here. So the first one is really on about water quality and meeting our water quality goal of addressing the fishable and swimmable goal of the Clean Water Act. As folks may know, the Clean Water Act set out a goal of making all the waters of the United States fishable and swimmable. They thought it was going to take 20 years. Turns out kind of difficult. And it's really at that challenge is really the basis for the National Estuary Program, in that when the act was revised in the 1980s, there was a recognition that in complex estuaries like New York and New Jersey Harbor, achieving those goals was going to be challenging. Challenging because the science really wasn't that well understood in this complex ecosystem, because there are so many different stakeholders involved, whether it's the 2 states or the multiplicity of agencies, and of course the hundreds of local units of local government, and because because there are so many people here, 14 million people. Actually achieving those goals, getting these waters to where they can be fishable and swimmable, was going to be hard. So Congress recognized that. They established the National Estuary Program, and that's where the collaboration came into being. And again, I think this slide tells the story of how we've moved towards meeting those fishable, swimmable goals in terms of dissolved oxygen. You know, dissolved oxygen critical to that fishable goal, to the health of the ecosystem and the aquatic species that live in our waterways. And you know, I used to feel that the understanding of kind of what hypoxia meant, that is, you know, the amount of dissolved oxygen in our waterway, was kind of tough for us to grasp. And then I'm sure you all remember earlier this year with the wildfires in Canada and the kind of smoky conditions that pervaded our region. You know, that idea of kind of limited oxygen became, you know, kind of apparent, right, to us as people. You know, you went outside, you know, and even folks without sort of respiratory issues, you know, kind of found it hard to breathe, right? You sense that smoke. And so I think you can imagine fish, when dissolved oxygen falls below some of these, the criteria, in particular, you know, again, measured chronic as being 4.8 milligrams per liter, you can understand the stress that causes. But fortunately, and it's really due to the credit of those agencies, the utilities, and you know, all the you know, sort of we the taxpayers and ratepayers working together, we have you know, made great strides towards our fishable goals. And in fact, you know, whereas, you know, 30 years ago, or I should say 50 years ago, you know, sort of chronic hypoxia was, you know, a likely occurrence, and acute hypoxia, that is, you know, where fish are dying, was something that happened regularly. Today, it's something that really does not occur that often. Now, and I'm seeing a question in the chat here that I want to sort of address. So someone, Lauren's a grade 4 teacher, and she's teaching. You're saying, can you draw that analogy? Yes. You know, I think that's a great example, and to me, it makes it real for folks, because you know, a lot of people feel like, you know, when they think about hypoxic waters, you think about, oh, there's no oxygen. Fish can just swim away from those waters, right? Fish are mobile. They know where it's tough to breathe. They can move away from those places where acute hypoxia is happening. But, you know, what you don't think about, or what biologists tell us, is that it's not just the acute hypoxia, it's also kind of the chronic conditions where it's tough to breathe, where people kind of, where fish actually, they can measure stress. And so it's important to think about that. So yes, absolutely good for adults and good for 10-year-olds. So when we think about, so hypoxia is an issue, and that fishable water is something that, you know, again, we've made great progress. We're not there yet, but we've made great progress. Where we've also made progress, but maybe there's another threshold to reach, is on that sort of swimmable status. And here you can see some data, and this is from our harbor-wide water quality monitoring report, where we can see where Enterococcus, sort of a representative bacteria that indicates sort of pathogens being in the water, you know, where we're still meeting, you know, not meeting safe levels for swimming and certain percentages of the time. And again, we feel that, you know, when, you know, it's important to view pathogens from this kind of discrete sample point of view, because, you know, as you can imagine, people don't go swimming, they don't put themselves at risk in terms of pathogen levels on an average day, right? People want to know, can I go with my kids and go swimming on Saturday, right? So that idea of specific samples is really, really important to think about. And you can see that in most places in the harbor, for most years, you know, the percentage of samples, you know, exceeding that kind of dangerous limit for pathogens is relatively low. And in fact, we know that swimming is possible most days of the year in certain parts of the harbor, including the lower bay, sort of outside the Verrazano Bridge out to Sandy Hook, as well as the upper New York Bay and the lower Hudson River, sort of between the Verrazano and the Battery, or up towards the lower Hudson River, up towards the Tappan Zee Bridge. And then, in fact, we could create swimming opportunities for people in those waterways. But the reason, that it's a challenge to do that is that, and the reason that those discrete levels sometimes in particular kind of don't meet, we get that those samples not meeting, and maybe, on average, we'd have to close those bathing beaches 1 or 2 weekends a month, is because of combined sewer overflows like this one in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Basically, New York City and much of northern New Jersey, as well as Yonkers, has a combined sewer system. And what that means is that when it rains, when it's dry weather, you use your bathroom in your home, and that water goes to the sewage treatment plant and it gets treated. But when wet weather events occur, and in some places it's as little as a quarter or even a half inch of rain over a couple hour period, those storm sewers on the street also enter the combined system. And if there's too much water in the system, then a valve opens up and all the water goes into our waterways. And unfortunately, this means that it's not just the stormwater from the street, but it's also that wastewater from your homes. And so, sometimes it's quite dramatic, like this CSO outfall next to a beautiful sandy beach in Perth Amboy. But these CSO outfalls are located all over our region. You can see them here on the map. Those black dots are combined sewer outfalls. New York City, which is, operates the utility for wastewater in New York City through the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, or the utilities that make up the North Jersey Harbor Dischargers Group in New Jersey, are tackling this issue. They've all prepared long-term control plans to address CSO outfalls. And a big component for both New York City and the utilities in New Jersey and in Westchester is green infrastructure. And basically the idea behind the green infrastructure is simple. When it rains, can we detain some of that stormwater on the street, and can we even retain it to be used by plants like in this rain garden? And the idea is simple, and it kind of mimics the way natural watersheds work, where water, rather than flowing directly into storm sewers, actually is trapped by vegetation, is slowed down, and is, you sort of reduce that peak hour flow, the flashiness of the watershed, of an urbanized watershed, so that the sewage treatment system has enough time to then, take that water in, and the water can continue to go through the wastewater treatment system. So New York City and now starting in much of northern New Jersey have installed these green infrastructure facilities throughout. And again, it's making use of plants and their ability to absorb water and then transpire it into the air that really makes it a valuable addition. Now, it doesn't solve the whole problem, and it's important to recognize that. We did some work in again, going to the role of HEP. What our role has been is to sort of try to advance this technology and make it accessible to the urban planners and to the wastewater engineers who are developing these long-term control plans, so they feel confident that this treatment system will work, and that we can identify the space that's available to install these kind of facilities. So we did a study in Perth Amboy where it sort of modeled on two sewer sheds, and outlined in green and sort of highlighting the CSO outfalls, including that one that I was showing you discharge, which is right here. I think you can see my cursor. But it's one of those ways, if you can, I can't remember if you can see it or not, but it's one of those outfalls right in Perth Amboy. You can it'll reduce the flows coming into that by about 20%. So again, it's not going to solve the problem, but it can really go towards reducing the amount of wastewater and that's going through the combined sewer system, and reducing the number of times that valve opens up. And at the same time, and this is critically important, it also adds those co-benefits of creating some amenity, beautiful spaces for plantings, whether it's here on this parking lot or anywhere else in people's homes. And again, there's plenty of rain gardens. The New York Botanic Gardens, next time you guys go visit it, has some beautiful installations right near the greenhouses where they've incorporated this technology, and maybe elsewhere as well, where you can go and see this kind of green infrastructure at work. And of course, that sort of idea of incorporating plants and natural watershed processes isn't just important in sort of our most urbanized areas and those combined sewer overflow areas, but it's also important throughout the watershed. This is a picture from Dave Ralston up at Woods Hole on a study that we funded that he did, looking at the amount of sediment that was transported during Hurricane Irene I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And you can see the amount of sediment entering the Hudson River and flowing down to the estuary quite clearly. The amount of dirt that was transported was in the millions of cubic yards. And of course, that has a huge impact on the ecosystem of the Hudson, both in terms of we lost, I believe it was, a large percentage of the eelgrass that was growing in the mid-Hudson because it was buried under the sediment. And of course, that sediment also carries with it nutrients and other potential pollutants that disturbed other parts of the ecosystem. So, and of course, sadly enough, these kind of extreme rain events, whether it's, hurricanes or just large kind of cloudburst precipitation events, are going to grow more frequent due to climate change. And so one way of ensuring that dirt stays where it's supposed to is by better management of our tributaries. And you can see here, sort of erosion happening, and you can imagine how, erosion like this, just gets amplified during those kind of large rainfall events, and increasing the amount of dirt entering the system. So one way we're tackling that is through addressing, again, sort of managing tributaries and increasing tree plantings along those tributaries for conservation purposes, and also by managing the culverts that run under many of our streets and our bridges, and making sure that those are right sized and that they can address stormwater flows and not cause scouring, because they're undersized for the amount of rainfall that's coming in through them. So another area where kind of plants make a big difference, and this is probably not so surprising, is on our goal to meet our habitat and ecological health. In an urbanized estuary like the New York, New Jersey Harbor Estuary, a question for restoration ecologists, a fundamental question is, what are you restoring it to, right? We can't return to sort of pre-Columbian times, 400 years ago when you might think that people lived more in balance with nature, and there was sort of a full complement of native species. Our estuary is very heavily urbanized. And so really the way that we and our partners at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Port Authority, and the rest of the partners within our restoration work group have identified it is through 12 target ecosystem characteristics. Thinking about, so what are those ecosystem characteristics in each of these 12 areas, and what are the services that we sort of derive from those habitat types, and what are the ecosystem values that are derived from those habitat types, or those ecosystem characteristics, and how can we restore those characteristics? And again, you can see this, and if you want to dive deeply, it's in the comprehensive restoration plan that we and our partners at the Army Corps of Engineers and the 2 states have adopted to guide restoration efforts. So I want to focus in on one particular characteristic, and that's shorelines and shallows. So of course, the shorelines in our region, are a key ecosystem characteristic for the estuary. It's really, in many ways, for many people, kind of what define the estuary, right? It's those wetlands and shorelines. And here you can see one beautifully restored area right in the Bronx at Soundview Park. And this is the Soundview Lagoons, which 20 years ago was a series of borrow pits and where folks had dug out material and placed fill, and have now been restored to a more naturalized shoreline, providing those kind of, those sort of nursery benefits that we associate with estuaries, kind of sloping shoreline with shallow water, a lot of Spartina and other wetland plants that provide refuge and a nursery for young fish and many other creatures that come and feed on the little fish and the other animals that reside there. These are super productive ecosystems, among the highest productive ecosystems on the planet. And unfortunately, of course, we've lost more than 85% of them here in our region, but we're busy, restoring many of them, whether it's on shorelines, or you can see here, this is a marsh island that's now been restored in Jamaica Bay, and it's been restored using fill from the dredging of the Arthur Kill and Kill Van Kull and other, when they deepened the harbor about 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And of course, we can also restore that shallow water habitat through oysters, right? This is become very much a very visible symbol of our restoration efforts. This is up in the Tappan Zee area, part of the mitigation for the construction of the new bridge there that my colleague at the foundation, Jim Lodge, worked on. And again, it's sort of mimicking those the characteristics of the estuary that once existed. That's at the heart of all these restoration efforts. And in thinking about that kind of shallow water or habitat or shoreline habitat, we understand, I apologize for the lettering here on this slide from our friends at Scape Landscape Architects, but it's not, we can't simply restore it all to sort of a natural system. It's really thinking about it in terms of this blend between natural and nature-based or engineered solutions that try to mimic nature. Because, of course, here in the estuary, there's, it's a heavily urbanized area. A lot of the shoreline is being actively used, for maritime purposes or for real estate purposes, people's homes, people's businesses, public parks. Many of them are built on filled land. And, while we might like to think about that land as being in balance and eroding and being sort of the dynamic shoreline that we associate with, let's say, some of these more naturalized edge, whether it's, a dune on the beach or a wetland shoreline, in this estuary, they're not going to exist unless we help them. So, what a lot of designers, restoration experts, and managers are moving towards this kind of blend between gray and green, where you're either sort of greening the gray by adding new textures or particular features that can ensure that the sort of riprap or bulkheads are better habitat, or by, let's say, graying the green, protecting naturalized habitat with sills and other structures so that they're better able to withstand the erosive powers of waves and storms. And we're giving kind of nature a helping hand that it needs. So, we are working with all our partners to advance this. And you can see here a beautiful example of a project at Hunters Point Shoreline in Queens, where as part of a residential development and park development, they created sort of an artificial wetland or naturalized shoreline and built-in resiliency features. And you can see that kind of blending of sort of gray features to green features as part of that park design, all on, I will say, filled land, right, in the estuary. But what's critical for all of these, and a particular role we're trying to play, is making sure that this kind of green infrastructure, these sort of novel techniques, are really delivering the services that are promised. Whenever you think about innovation, and in particular innovation when it comes to, let's say, resiliency and protecting people from flooding, we want to make sure that they work, right? And in particular around for ecological aspects of this, for the hard engineering, there's, years of experimentation and science and engineering standards that engineers and lawyers that look over their shoulders are comfortable signing on to. But for some of these ecological techniques, we're still building that community of practice. So our role within the estuary program is to help improve that community of practice and to help ensure that those parameters are met. And so we've been doing that with a number of partners: New York State Department of State, New York City Parks, landscape architects, and many others, to sort of improve that. In particular, one way is through the measuring success protocols that we developed for the Department of State. And I should have mentioned the Science and Resiliency Institute at Jamaica Bay, a key partner of ours. And we've been funding students to use this protocol, both as part of their education and as well as being able to deliver good information to the managers of these sites, because as I'm sure folks can imagine, it's much easier to pay for let's say construction of these wetlands than it is for monitoring over time. It's always a challenge to pay for that as well as maintenance. So the idea of this monitoring is both to sort of provide good data to make the practice work better, but also as a means of informing the managers that are responsible for maintaining these systems and giving them some real-time feedback on this. So again, another key way that HAP is doing this work. And so third goal that we've been working on is community engagement. And this is critical, again, for the 14 million folks who live within our estuary's boundaries, we might want to make sure that they're involved in the decision-making around the estuary. And we do that in a number of ways. And of course, it's certainly a key, it's a salient quality of our estuary is the number of groups and stewardship groups that are very actively involved in estuary issues. And this survey was done with our partners at the USDA Forest Service Urban Field Station, where through their stew mapping process, we worked with them to identify stewardship groups. So supporting those groups, making sure they have the tools they need is really critically important. Another way that we work is obviously by getting people out to the resource. And, we do things like publish a paddling guide that, helps enable people to get out there and enjoy the waterway. And, sort of experience the wonder of the estuary. And then a final way that we do it is by supporting people doing citizen science or community science, I should say, in the estuary, because we feel that, these organizations, whether it's Bronx River Alliance here on the Bronx River, or excuse me, Jamaica Bay Eco Watchers out in Jamaica Bay. These are folks planting Spartina on one of those marsh islands I was showing you before. Sort of that kind of volunteer-led stewardship effort is a great way of getting people involved and engaged in the estuary, both in terms of its, helping care for it, but also to become, sort of committed stewards, maybe becoming a member of a stewardship organization, or, becoming, going to a public meeting where decisions are being made in management. And then increasingly, we're also getting involved in sort of supporting workforce training, because as you can imagine, whether it's this rain garden in New Jersey, or any of those other sort of green infrastructure or shoreline treatments that I was talking about, maintenance is a key concern. And so we've been working with our utility partners along with stewardship organizations to ensure that they have a workforce that is ready and able to maintain these systems, and that they're sort of trained, because again, it's not in some cases this requires specialized training. In other cases, it's really a matter of ensuring that when folks are hiring for these jobs, they're able to find qualified candidates in the communities where it's located. And it's it's an important means for us to ensure that the benefits of the estuary, including, sort of its management and stewardship, touch the entire region. So, it's another important part of our work, and again, one that's growing going forward. So, with that, again, that was, I know, a quick run through of a bunch of the different work we're doing. I'm happy to take questions. If you're interested in learning more about the estuary and the work of the Harbor Estuary Program, there's no better way than by joining us at our annual conference. This year, it's going to happen November 28th, 29th, and 30th. I believe the first day is going to be in person. The other 2 days will have a series of virtual panels, over Zoom. And you can find out more on our website. If you sign up for our newsletter, that's the best way to stay informed about events like this or any other seminars or offerings that you might be interested in. With that, let me close, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very
Oop, okay, yeah, sorry. Thank you for that. I know that we're all familiar with these bodies of water, but I think that was a lot of really interesting information about what's going on with them and stuff like that. So I know I have some questions, but if people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And it looks like we've already got some stuff here. Okay, so first we had a question from Christina about the stewardship groups with the Stew Map, and how people can get involved with that, or where they can find more information.
Yeah, so I will drop a link. So Stew Map is an effort by the Forest Service Urban Field Station here in the New York, New Jersey region, but really they've done it all over the world to basically advance stewardship practice in a number of different ways. And one way they do that is by sort of assessing who's out there, who's concerned about the estuary, or who's concerned about the landscape in general. And so they've done these assessments periodically. It's a survey that they send out to people, and it's kind of people self-identify as stewards. You can learn, I'm not sure what their plans are for the next survey. They've done it for different clients. They did it for us. They've done it for the New York City mayor's office, the mayor's office of, I know what's now the mayor's office of climate and environmental justice, used to be the sustainability office. But so that's where you can sort of enter your name, but I'll drop the link in the chat, and you can learn more about StuMap and how you might put information about your group into the StuMap survey. And they've done other work too, around stewardship and what it means to be stewards and all that kind of stuff.
We've got a question here also from Zihao, which something that I'm interested in as well. So the Army Corps of Engineers plans in the South Shore of Staten Island that they're building that seawall there. What thoughts you might have about that and the effect that might have on the existing native populations?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a question that's top of mind, not just in Staten Island, but throughout the region. So just maybe a second, maybe a little bit of a background for folks who aren't familiar. So the Army Corps, following Hurricane Sandy, identified a number of regions around the country where they thought large-scale resiliency efforts aimed in particular around coastal surges and sort of storm surge like Sandy or nor'easters needed to be addressed and mitigated. And so that focus led them to undertake something called the Harbor and Tributary Study for New York and New Jersey. They've released a tentatively selected plan. They're in the draft stage of that study now. They've released a tentatively selected plan that identifies, and I know I'm gonna get this number wrong, but I believe it's 10 alternatives, and along with a tentatively selected plan, and basically looking throughout the region and at a very high level, sort of identifying the costs and benefits in terms of hazard mitigation of different options. So they, that study is going forward throughout the region, and I'm looking more carefully at the question here, and I'm realizing I may have misspoken here. So that study has been proposing potentially seawalls along with storm surge barriers throughout the region. The South Shore of Staten Island is a study that came up right after Sandy, and of course, the reason being that tragically, folks lost their lives in Staten Island during that hurricane. And the Army Corps kind of moved forward to address that under some existing authorities they had. And so they've been moving forward with a plan to do that on the South Shore of Staten Island. I think it's obviously, there are impacts to these seawalls, whether it's here or I can look outside my window right now and see where Battery Park City is building a berm as part of the lower resiliency planning effort, and they've removed a number of trees that are planted there. So, that's not without its costs, and I think everyone must recognize that. So, I think it's a question of, everyone's willing, what are people's willingness to live with risk? And again, whether or not these designs can do a better job of addressing sort of the ecological resources that are in place. So whether it's something that's happening now, and my understanding is their plan to build a seawall has been funded and is on its way. I know there's some issues and concerns there, but my understanding is that project is happening. Or it's something like HATS where it's more they're still in the planning stages. I think sadly enough, I think that's going to be a hard question for all of us to face in the future.
Because I guess with projects like this, it's always that balance between the kind of human economic interests and then everything else. And so that's why it's good
Yeah.
to hopefully have people that are making those decisions to have all of the information and kind of be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, you know, unfortunately there's no easy answer, right? You know, it's not, we can't just say like, well, let's not do anything. Because, you know, sadly, you know, because, you know, again, we've had flood zones in this region forever, right? We've known that hurricanes will have come in the past and will come again. Whether they're as devastating as Sandy was, we don't know, but we do know they're coming again, and they're going to be more frequent in the future. And the impacts will be will be amplified because of sea level rise. You know, I think as you said, Lydia, I think the key thing is for folks to participate in the decision-making process and to make sure that the agencies that are making these decisions and are weighing these options, and as well as our elected officials that fund those agencies, you know, understand the trade-offs, and we're making informed decisions.
We did actually do a field trip last year with EcoFlora at Oakwood Beach that kind of brought some of those specific kind of things related to that seawall kind of up for us. All right. I also have a question about the kind of shoreline stabilization with the erosion. So you mentioned that there's things like tree plantings that are happening in along these kind of edges. Are there certain sorts of plants that that are being selected that might do a better job, like with that kind of stabilization, or is it just in general like having anything there to kind of provide that kind of matrix?
So, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure I totally understood. You mean for the NMBF?
For like when you were talking about like when there was like the picture of like the like eroded kind of like river bank, and that they're like, what are there specific kinds of like pallets that are being used for the stabilization, or
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, there are. The short answer is there are. You know, one in particular that I'm aware of is the Hudson River Estuary Program, kind of a sister state-led effort that focuses, you know, kind of upriver on the Hudson, has something called Trees for Tribs program. And so that it basically, they fund tree planting along tributaries, both for erosion prevention as well as, and it's not just trees, but vegetative plantings, as well as, you know, for the shade they provide and all the other benefits of trees and vegetation along rivers. And so I know they've got kind of a toolkit for people to use. So that's kind of one example. And again, there's others. Our focus is has been really on the sort of thinking about kind of road streams crossings and right sizing culverts. And so we just prepared a toolkit for use by designers. And it's basically to assess you know, how communities or landowners or departments of transportations can look at those road stream crossings, at those culverts and bridges, and identify whether or not it's rightly sized in terms of hydrodynamic flows, as well as in terms of fish passage and other habitat benefits of having, you know, sort of a wider, more naturalized road stream crossing. You know, you can imagine, I have way more slides that I didn't show, but you can imagine you know, sort of contrasting sort of a culvert that's like a pipe that's, you know, totally, you know, cast out of steel, is raised off the river bottom or stream bottom, and is, you know, undersized so that it's either, you know, so that it's discharging, you know, the flow is concentrated, and the flow, you know, if you remember your high school physics and the Bernoulli principle, if you take a volume and constrict its flow, you're going to increase the pressure of the water. So it's discharging water under much greater pressure. You can imagine that kind of environment not being as conducive to fish or turtles or frogs or other wildlife, compared to a more naturalized bottom where the stream bottom is dirt or rubble or mud, or where the flow, where there's plenty of space for animals to get across, and for fish to go through, and where the flow isn't constrained, so it's a more even flow, whether it's raining or not. So the goal of the toolkit is to help people identify the places where naturalizing those stream crossings makes a lot of sense, or is going to provide the greatest number of benefits. And again, you can find that. I'll find the link and I'll pop it in the chat.
I think it's really fascinating how there's kind of this intersection that like between all these, between the ecology and the engineering, and kind of to get them all to work together. And
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a growing place of interest, both between sort of the ecologists, the landscape architects that are in some cases designing these park systems, and the engineers who are responsible for the final construction drawings and the building of them. It's a fascinating conversation about trying to meet the people's needs. And I should add the ecologists, who identify what those ecosystem characteristics are that we're trying to create. Absolutely, a place if people are interested, a place where that conversation happens, and one of my favorite blogs is the Nature of Cities blog. And they've hosted a number of kind of discussions on that particular question. And you can find a lot of interesting resources there on that particular point.
And we've got a question that just came in from Mark that kind of is related to this also. So there's a lot of these kind of large scale kind of restoration engineering projects, but are there any projects that are looking more towards this, like forever wild, regenerative, restricted use kind of?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, traditional conservation practice is all about that, right? So you think about the Adirondack Park or the Catskill Park, these forest preserves that New York State created that are designated as forever wild to protect water supply, right? Or to protect, in the case of the Catskills, to help protect New York City's drinking water supply. In the case of the Adirondacks, originally it was set up to protect water flows to the Erie Canal. But those are sort of, again, I think it's still a valuable practice. It's obviously land acquisition and kind of long-term conservation is obviously, potentially provides the most ecosystem benefits. But it's expensive. And of course, in an era of climate change, of invasive species, it's there's no place where forever wild is really wild, right? What does that even mean? You know what I mean? So I think it's something to think about. But I would totally agree that thinking in that way about places where nature can take its course and still provide those ecosystem services and those, sort of non-monetary or non-person oriented benefits, the wild benefits that we all love, is really important. And it's, trying to find places where we can engineer that stuff, and in places where we do need to engineer it, it is really important to recognize, as Mark points out, that you got to come up with a long range plan, and you got to come up with a maintenance strategy, and there are potential conflicts.
Thank you. And yeah, if anybody that asked questions, if I didn't address like fully what you wanted to, like, please feel free to chime in here too. All right, we'll go back quick. There was a question from Lauren. If a community or building or school wants to turn a tree pit in their neighborhood into a bioswale, how might they go about doing that?
So, great question. So New York City, if this is in New York City, you can look at, there's a couple of ways of doing that. New York City DEP is really responsible for creating these rain gardens or enhanced tree pits. And if you go and Google Green Infrastructure New York City DEP, you can find where they're prioritizing the construction of those, and potentially where connect with them in terms of finding a place, enabling those resources to come to your neighborhood. If you're thinking about a tree pit, it's really New York City parks. That's a place to look. Again, if you go to the New York City parks and urban and tree planting, that's a great place to go to. If you're in New Jersey, Rutgers, the Rutgers Water Resources Institute is a great place to start, and they have a lot of great resources.
We just got a question come in here about Phragmites. I would say yes, it's still considered an invasive.
Well, that's a terrific question. It is an invasive. I think there is a ongoing debate, and maybe Murad is familiar with this debate, I'm guessing Lydia is, between the value of Phragmites, even as an invasive, because it does provide some habitat value. There's some evidence that it provides greater resiliency benefits. And the village of Piermont on Hudson is a place where the community has a large Phragmites marsh, where they were very grateful as they saw that the Phragmites helped to mitigate some of the flooding from Sandy at that time, and have called for its protection as a Phragmites dominated system. There's a bunch of researchers who have looked at Phragmites in the Meadowlands and other places and sort of identified those benefits. So it's an ongoing debate. Kind of going back to Mark's great question, I think it's that issue of Phragmites versus Spartina as your palette for wetland restoration in the region. That kind of goes right to the heart of that question, because if you do, replant with Spartina, you are, asking yourself to maintain it over time, whereas Phragmites, it appears, is a much more stable, plant in this region.
Yeah, it's always an interesting kind of way to look at, and invasives in terms of their like what services are they providing within the ecosystem. Again, it's always, there's a balance of everything. So, and it's here, so it's good if at least there's some benefits that are happening.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to worry about taking it out is expensive. Ensuring that your Spartina marsh isn't recolonized is expensive. So really important when we think about restoration goals.
We just had something come in from Sharon with sea level rise and changes in salinity. Are there this kind of plants that are here now that are being used? Will there be any kind of changes? How are they faring already, and how does it seem like that will go?
Yeah, great question. So with just to take a step back, so with sea level rise, salinity will, the salt front in the Hudson is expected to move further north over time. I'll add that it's also a potential impact, as part of that HAT study, one of the potential elements of those alternatives include the creation of storm surge barriers, both potentially at the mouth of the Verrazano or on some of the smaller tributaries, like the Newtown Creek or Jamaica Bay. And all of that, whether it's sea level rise that we know is coming or the possibility of creating these storm surge barriers, will increase the salt front's movement up the Hudson. And so the Hudson River National Estuarine Research Reserve, which manages sites like that marsh of Piermont Marsh or Tivoli Bays further up the Hudson, they're very concerned about what the impact will be on those wetlands further north. And so they've done some studies looking at that specifically to see that how changes in salinity will impact those wetlands that, many of which are adapted for a specific range of salinity. And, I think, what's important is to recognize that, the sea level rise is happening. So it's not a matter of if, or it's more when and how fast it'll happen. And so the question is, can we offer those wetlands enough time to adapt successfully? Can they migrate further upland? Will new species, if it was over thousands of years, sea level's been rising in this estuary since the Ice Age, right? But it's done at a pace where plants have been able to adapt. And ecosystems have been able to adapt. And so I think that's the key question, is that question of time and the ability of those wetland habitat complexes to adapt over time.
Great.
All right.
Nice. Good. Perfect.
Okay. It looks like everybody has asked the questions that they have so far. Oh, it looks like Zihao actually has a comment. He says Phragmites as a placeholder value to prevent some erosion, but it's incredibly short-sighted to ignore the biodiversity it displays. Yes. I know that there's definitely a lot of rhetoric surrounding invasive species and their ecosystem services in New York City especially. And I agree with you. I'm sure most of us can agree. I'm sorry if I'm cutting out. I don't know what my service is doing. But thank you, everybody, for attending our EcoFlora seminar. I'm just going to say it. This month is probably our last EcoFlora seminar for a while, at least that we're aware of. So we really appreciate you joining us today. And if you've joined us before, we really appreciate it. We also have a community EcoFlora survey available online if you'd like to participate. If you are participating in the project now, so we would love to hear about your experience. It looks like Lydia's going to link that in the chat. So please feel free to fill that out. We would really appreciate it. And thank you, Rob, very much for your presentation. The estuary is something that people in New York and New Jersey, I think, care about and value a lot. And so the conservation is incredibly important, and your work surrounding it is also incredibly important. So thank you for sharing that with us today. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email Lydia or I. And that is all for tonight. We thank you for joining us. The recording should be posted shortly. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate all the questions.